A police sergeant chases a speeder through the New Mexico desert. He hears a roar, sees a flame, and abandons the pursuit. Minutes later, he's diving for cover as an egg-shaped craft on metal legs blasts into the sky, leaving burned brush and landing marks in the dirt. The FBI investigates. The Air Force investigates. Project Blue Book files it as unknown. What landed in Socorro on April 24, 1964? Socorro sits in the high desert of central New Mexico, a small city of around 9,000 souls surrounded by scrubland, distant mountains, and endless sky. In April of 1964, it was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where a police officer could work his entire career without encountering anything more mysterious than a stolen hubcap or a bar fight on Saturday night. Lonnie Zamora was 31 years old that spring, a sergeant with the Socorro Police Department. According to those who knew him, he was solid, dependable, the kind of officer who showed up on time, did his job without complaint, and went home to his family. The FBI would later describe him in their official report as well-regarded, sober, industrious, and conscientious, not given to fantasy. He'd been on the force for 5 years, patrolling the outskirts of town in his white 1964 Pontiac patrol car, keeping an eye on the highway that cut through the desert like a ribbon of asphalt through an ocean of sand and sage. Friday afternoon, April 24th. The sky was clear, the wind steady, visibility stretching for miles across the mesa. Zamora was on patrol around 5:45 when he spotted a black Chevrolet tearing down the road well over the speed limit. He hit his lights and gave chase, the Pontiac's engine growling as he closed the distance. Then he heard it, a roar. Not a jet engine, not thunder, something else. It started low, deep in frequency, then climbed higher until it filled the air around him. And rising into the southwestern sky, maybe half a mile away, a flame. Bluish-orange, narrow at the top like a funnel, wider at the base. Zamora's first thought was the dynamite shack. There was an explosive storage facility out in that direction, left over from old mining operations. If it had blown, people could be hurt. He made a decision in that split second that would change his life forever. He let the speeder go, radioed dispatcher Nep Lopez that he was checking out a possible explosion, and turned off the highway onto a rough gravel road leading toward the flame. The Pontiac bucked and groaned over the uneven terrain. Zamora had to make several attempts to climb the steep grade, the rear wheels spinning in loose dirt before finally cresting the hill. As he came over the rise and looked down into the shallow arroyo below, he saw something that made no sense. At first glance, it looked like an overturned car, white, metallic, gleaming in the late afternoon sun. But as he got closer, the shape became clearer. Not a car, an oval object, smooth and seamless, roughly the size of a sedan. And it wasn't overturned. It was standing upright on 4 thin legs, like some kind of landing gear. The metal struts angled outward from a central body. Zamora slowed the patrol car, his mind racing through possibilities. A crashed aircraft? Some kind of experimental vehicle? The object sat there in silence, about 150 yards away, resting on a flat section of rock in the arroyo. And then he saw them. 2 figures, small, maybe the size of children or short adults, standing beside the craft. They wore white coveralls, smooth and form-fitting. One of them seemed to notice Zamora's car. According to his later account, the figure jumped, startled, as if surprised by his presence. Zamora stopped his vehicle and reached for his radio. He called it in as a possible 1044, a traffic accident, and requested backup from New Mexico State Police Sergeant Sam Chavez, a friend he trusted. Then he stepped out of the car, his hand instinctively moving toward his service revolver, though he didn't draw it. He started walking toward the object. The air changed as Zamora approached. It grew warmer, thick with a smell that reminded him of sulfur. Sharp, acrid, like 1,000 matches struck at once. Beneath that, a mechanical sound. Not quite a hum, not quite a whir. Something rhythmic and steady, punctuated by a hissing that made him think of compressed air escaping from industrial equipment. He moved closer, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The figures he'd seen were gone now, disappeared behind the craft or inside it. He couldn't tell, but the object itself became more defined with every step. Smooth white metal, no seams, no rivets, no welds. It looked as though it had been poured from a single piece of material, perfectly formed. On the side facing him, a red marking stood out against the pale surface, an insignia of some kind, an inverted V with 3 horizontal bars running through it, each line clean and precise, about 2.5 feet across. Zamora had worked on machines his whole adult life. He knew metal, knew how things were built. This didn't match anything in his experience. No panel lines, no access hatches he could identify. Just that smooth, unbroken surface and the 4 landing legs holding it a few feet off the ground. He was perhaps 50 feet away when he heard a different sound, a metallic thump, 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 like hatches closing or heavy doors sealing shut. The kind of sound that makes your chest tighten because you know something is about to happen. Then the roar came back, but this time it wasn't distant. It was right there, erupting from the underside of the craft with a force that seemed to vibrate through Zamora's bones. The sound started low, a deep, guttural rumble, and then climbed in pitch until it became a shrieking, deafening roar that drowned out every other noise in the desert. Simultaneously, a cone of flame shot downward from beneath the object, blue at its core, orange at the edges, tightly focused like the exhaust from a rocket. Zamora's survival instinct kicked in. He thought the thing was going to explode. He turned and ran, stumbling in his haste, and dove behind his patrol car. His sunglasses flew off his face. His knee hit the dirt hard. He pressed himself against the ground, one hand covering his head, waiting for the blast. But the explosion never came. Instead, the roar shifted. It became a high-frequency whine, piercing and sharp. And then, silence. Complete, sudden silence. Zamora lifted his head, peering around the bumper of the Pontiac. The craft was rising. Slowly at first, vertically, the flames still pushing downward in a tight column of blue-orange fire. The landing legs retracted smoothly into the body as it climbed. No smoke, no exhaust trail, just that focused beam of light and heat boring into the ground. The brush directly beneath it ignited, small fires spreading through the dry greasewood. The object hovered for a moment about 20 feet off the ground, perfectly still. Then the flame cut off. The whine stopped. And in the eerie quiet that followed, the craft began to move. It didn't tilt or bank, it simply accelerated horizontally, skimming low over the desert floor toward the southwest. Zamora watched it clear the 8-foot-tall dynamite shack by maybe 3 feet, moving faster now, a white oval shape against the blue sky. Within seconds it was gone, disappearing beyond the line of hills in the distance. No sound, no exhaust. No trace except the smell of sulfur still hanging in the air and the small fires burning in the arroyo where it had been. Zamora stood there, his heart hammering in his chest, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. His ears rang from the roar. His hands shook. He walked slowly back to where the object had stood, his legs unsteady, and looked down at the scorched earth. 4 depressions in the dirt. Oval-shaped, each about 8 or 9 inches wide, arranged in a rough trapezoid pattern, maybe 13 to 15 feet apart. The soil was pushed outward on one side of each mark, as if something heavy had pressed down at an angle. One of the impressions sat on a flat rock, and the rock was broken, a metallic scrape visible on the stone surface. Greasewood bushes smoldered all around the landing site. Some were still burning, thin trails of smoke rising into the still air. The ground was hot. Zamora could feel the residual heat radiating up from the dirt. He returned to his patrol car and grabbed the radio, his voice tight with adrenaline. He called dispatcher Lopez, asked him to look out the window to see if he could spot anything in the sky. Lopez asked what he was looking for. Zamora, grasping for words, said it looked like a balloon. It was the closest thing he could think of to describe something that defied description. Then he radioed Chavez again, his tone urgent. He needed someone else to see this. He needed confirmation that he wasn't losing his mind. If you're finding this story as compelling as we do, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with anyone who's ever wondered what really happened in the skies above New Mexico. Your support helps us bring these incredible documented cases to light. Sergeant Sam Chavez arrived within minutes, his patrol car kicking up dust as he pulled in beside Zamora's vehicle. He found his colleague standing near the arroyo, pale and visibly shaken. Chavez would later tell investigators that Zamora was white as a sheet, trembling, pointing down at the smoldering brush and the marks in the ground. In all the time Chavez had known him, he'd never seen Lonnie Zamora rattled, not once. Together, they walked down to the landing site. The fires were still burning, small flames licking at the bases of the bushes. Chavez had to stamp some of them out with his boots. The depressions were exactly where Zamora said they'd be, fresh, clearly defined, the dirt still warm to the touch. Chavez examined them closely, noting how the soil had been pushed aside as if by something landing with considerable force. There were no footprints. No tire tracks, no sign of anyone having been there except Zamora himself. Within an hour, the site was swarming with people. Socorro Police Chief Ernest Thompson arrived, followed by Sheriff Martin Vigil and several deputies. Word had already spread through the small department, and the urgency in Zamora's radio calls had made it clear this was no routine matter. Someone contacted nearby White Sands missile range to ask if they'd had any tests or launches in the area. White Sands said no. Nothing scheduled, nothing unscheduled, nothing that could explain what Zamora described. By 7 o'clock that evening, federal authorities were on scene. Army Captain Richard T. Holder, the uprange commander at White Sands Proving Grounds, arrived with a small team of personnel. Right behind him came FBI Special Agent D. Arthur Burns Jr. from the Albuquerque office. Both men had heard the initial reports and recognized immediately that this wasn't something local law enforcement could handle alone. Captain Holder and Agent Burns examined the site in the fading daylight, taking measurements, photographing the landing impressions and the burned vegetation. According to the official FBI report filed days later, they found no evidence of fraud, no footprints from pranksters, no remnants of pyrotechnics or conventional explosives. The physical evidence matched Zamora's account in every detail. Holder made a point of checking with dispatcher Lopez about other reports. Lopez confirmed that 3 separate residents had called the sheriff's office between 5:50 and 6 o'clock, reporting a blue flame in the sky south of Socorro. The timing aligned perfectly with Zamora's sighting. Whatever had been in that arroyo, other people had seen it too, or at least seen its departure. That night, Holder, Burns, and local officers interviewed Zamora at length at the state police office. He walked them through every detail, from the moment he heard the roar to the moment the craft disappeared over the hills. His story never wavered. The roar that started low and climbed high, the blue-orange flame shaped like a narrow funnel, the smooth white metal with no seams, the red insignia, the 2 figures in white coveralls, the landing legs that retracted as it lifted off. Holder sketched diagrams based on Zamora's descriptions. He asked Zamora to draw the symbol he'd seen on the craft. Zamora complied, producing a simple but precise drawing, an inverted V with 3 horizontal bars cutting through it. Holder instructed everyone present not to discuss the symbol publicly. It would serve as a verification tool, a way to catch anyone making false claims or copycat reports. The next morning, April 25th, the U.S. Air Force officially entered the investigation. Major William Connor from Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque arrived in Socorro, along with Staff Sergeant David Moody, an investigator from Project Blue Book who happened to be in the area. They spent hours at the landing site, taking additional photographs and measurements in full daylight. The 4 landing impressions measured roughly 8 to 9 inches across and 2 inches deep, each one showing dirt pushed outward on one side. The burn pattern covered an area about 10 feet in diameter, centered between the 4 marks. An Army explosives expert examined the site and found no trace of conventional propellants, no residue from dynamite, no fuel signature, nothing that would indicate a man-made device had caused the scorching. Soil samples were collected. Plant material from the burned bushes was bagged for laboratory analysis. The Air Force took plaster casts or detailed measurements of the landing depressions. Depending on which report you read, the documentation varies slightly. What's consistent across all reports is that the physical evidence was real, documented by multiple agencies and unexplainable by conventional means. Major Connor interviewed Zamora repeatedly over the next 2 days. According to the notes preserved in Project Blue Book files, Zamora's account remained consistent down to the smallest details. The sound of the roar, not like a jet, starting low, then going very loud. The flame, blue at the bottom, orange at the top, narrow like a funnel. The shape, oval or egg-like about the size of a car. The markings, red lettering or insignia about 2 feet high on the side. The figures, possibly small adults or children, in white coveralls, but no facial features clearly visible. Zamora also repeated his observation of the 2 individuals beside the craft. He couldn't describe them in detail because he'd only glimpsed them briefly from a distance before they disappeared, but he was certain of what he'd seen. 2 figures, human-sized or smaller, dressed in white, near the object before it took off. By April 26th, the story had broken nationally. Newspapers from California to New York ran articles about the policeman who'd witnessed a landed UFO. The Associated Press and United Press International carried the story on their wires. Headlines varied from cautious, New Mexico officer reports strange craft, to sensational, flying saucer lands in desert. The media attention turned Zamora's life upside down. Reporters camped outside his house. Strangers called at all hours. People drove past slowly, staring, trying to catch a glimpse of the man who'd seen a UFO. Zamora, who'd simply been doing his job, found himself at the center of a circus he never wanted to join. He gave a few brief statements through his police chief, then largely withdrew from public view. He turned down offers to appear on television, declined lucrative speaking engagements, and asked repeatedly to be left alone. On April 28th, Dr. J. Allen Hynek arrived in Socorro. Hynek was an astronomer and scientific consultant to Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program. Over the years, he debunked dozens of sightings, explaining them as weather balloons, aircraft, planets, or atmospheric phenomena. He came to Socorro expecting to do the same, but after interviewing Zamora, examining the site, and reviewing the physical evidence, Hynek found himself at a loss. There was no easy explanation. No weather balloon leaves landing marks and burns vegetation. No conventional aircraft could perform the maneuvers Zamora described. Vertical takeoff, silent horizontal acceleration, disappearing within seconds. And Zamora himself was precisely the kind of witness Hynek had rarely encountered. Trained, credible, with no apparent motive to fabricate such a story. Hynek's experience in Socorro would later be cited as a turning point in his career. It was one of the cases that convinced him some UFO reports deserved serious scientific study rather than automatic dismissal. The FBI's official report, filed on May 8, 1964, summarized the case with notable respect. Special Agent Burns, who'd known Zamora for approximately 5 years, wrote that the officer was well regarded as sober, industrious, and conscientious, not given to fantasy. The report confirmed the burned foliage and landing impressions were found as described. It noted that no evidence of a prank was discovered and that White Sands officials could not identify the object as any of their equipment. Project Blue Book conducted tests on the soil and vegetation samples. According to later accounts from Dr. Hynek and other researchers, the results were inconclusive or perhaps deliberately withheld. Rumors circulated that a chemist from the Public Health Service, who examined the site on April 25th, observed a patch of melted sand and detected unidentifiable organic compounds in the burned plant material. Supposedly, Air Force personnel confiscated her notes and instructed her not to discuss her findings. Whether true or not, no definitive laboratory report was ever made public. Throughout the spring and summer of 1964, Project Blue Book kept the Socorro case open, listing it as under investigation. Behind the scenes, there was speculation about various explanations. Could it have been a hoax by local college students from New Mexico Tech? Some investigators quietly pursued that angle, but no evidence emerged. No student ever came forward. No materials or equipment that could create the observed effects were found. Could it have been a secret military test? A lunar lander prototype, perhaps, being tested in the New Mexico desert? White Sands denied it. NASA denied it. The Air Force denied it. And even if some black project existed, why would it be tested so close to a public road where a police officer might stumble across it? By August, Dr. Hynek returned to Socorro with more sophisticated equipment, Geiger counters, magnetometers, to scan the landing site. 4 months had passed, and any residual radiation or electromagnetic signatures had long since dissipated, if they'd ever been there. The site yielded nothing new. In 1965, Project Blue Book officially classified the Socorro incident as unidentified. It was one of very few cases to receive that designation after thorough investigation. The official conclusion, preserved in Air Force records, acknowledged that no conventional explanation could account for the evidence. For Lonnie Zamora, the designation brought no comfort. The attention had already taken its toll. He rarely spoke about the incident after the initial investigations. Friends and colleagues noted that he seemed changed by the experience, quieter, more withdrawn. He remained on the Socorro police force for a few more years, then left law enforcement entirely, taking a job outside the public eye. He never recanted his story, never claimed it was a misunderstanding or a mistake. When occasionally pressed by researchers over the decades, he would reaffirm what he saw, his account never varying from that first report given on April 24, 1964. Sam Chavez, who'd arrived minutes after the craft departed, maintained until his own death that he believed Zamora encountered something extraordinary. The physical evidence was real. The fear in Zamora's eyes was real. Whatever had landed in that arroyo and blasted back into the sky, it was no weather balloon, no experimental aircraft, and no hoax. The desert outside Socorro still looks much the same as it did that April afternoon in 1964. The same scrubland, the same distant mountains, the same endless sky stretching from horizon to horizon. If you drive out to the arroyo, where Lonnie Zamora saw something that defied explanation, you'll find the land unchanged, weathered by decades of wind and sun. But the marks it left, those 4 depressions in the dirt, the scorched vegetation, those are long gone, erased by time and the elements. What remains is the documentation. 300 pages of official reports filed by the FBI, the US Army, and the Air Force. Photographs of the landing site taken within hours of the incident. witness statements that never changed, laboratory analyses that found nothing to disprove Zamora's account and nothing to explain it. And the question that still hangs in the air, like the smell of sulfur Zamora described. What was it? Dr. Hynek, who'd spent years explaining away UFO sightings, couldn't explain Socorro. The FBI, which investigated thousands of unusual incidents, filed their report and moved on, noting only that the witness was credible and the evidence was real. Project Blue Book, tasked with finding rational explanations for every UFO report, could only shrug and mark it unknown. Some researchers have suggested it was a hoax orchestrated by local officials to boost tourism in Socorro. But no participant ever came forward, no props or equipment were ever found, and the idea that a small-town police sergeant would subject himself to years of ridicule and unwanted attention for a publicity stunt strains credibility beyond reason. Others have speculated it was a secret military test, a prototype craft, a lunar lander, something classified that the government couldn't acknowledge. But every relevant agency denied having any operations in the area that day. And if it was a test, why hasn't it been declassified in the 60 years since? Why hasn't some retired engineer or pilot come forward to set the record straight? The most unsettling possibility is the simplest one, that Lonnie Zamora saw exactly what he said he saw. An oval craft on landing legs, two figures in white coveralls, a roar and a flame, and a departure so swift it left scorch marks and silence in its wake. If that's true, then the implications ripple outward in ways we still don't fully understand. It means something was in our skies that April afternoon, something with technology beyond our comprehension at the time, and perhaps even now. It means Zamora stood 50 feet from a mystery that neither science nor government could unravel. And it means the two figures he saw, those small shapes in white who seemed startled by his presence, came from somewhere we can't identify and returned to a place we can't follow. Zamora died in 2009 at the age of 76. He never sought fame from his experience, never wrote a book, never went on lecture circuits, never tried to profit from being the man who saw a UFO land. In his final years, when occasionally asked about that day, he would give the same answer he'd always given. He saw what he saw. He reported what he saw. And whatever it was real. The Socorro case remains open in the minds of researchers and investigators. Not officially, Project Blue Book closed in 1969, and the Air Force no longer investigates UFO reports. But in the court of unsolved mysteries, Socorro endures as one of the most thoroughly documented and stubbornly unexplainable encounters on record. Because the evidence doesn't lie. The photographs show the landing marks. The FBI report confirms Zamora's credibility. The Air Force files admit they couldn't solve it. And buried somewhere in classified archives, there might be laboratory results or analyses that were never made public. Data that could tip the scales one way or another. Or maybe there's nothing hidden. Maybe the truth is exactly what it appears to be. A police officer doing his job, chasing a speeder through the desert, heard a roar, saw a flame, and walked into a moment that changed his life forever. A moment when something from somewhere else touched down in the New Mexico desert, burned the earth, left its marks, and flew away into silence. The craft is gone. The figures are gone. Lonnie Zamora is gone. But the mystery remains, etched into official documents and preserved in testimony that never wavered. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills where the object disappeared, beyond the atmosphere where conventional aircraft can't reach, there might be an answer. Or maybe the answer is that some things land in the desert, leave their traces, and vanish before we can understand what they are or why they came. And all we're left with is the evidence, the testimony, and the haunting certainty that on April 24th, 1964, something extraordinary happened in Socorro, New Mexico. something that no government agency, no scientific investigation, and no skeptical inquiry has ever been able to explain away. Disclaimer: this video is based on public reports, eyewitness testimonies, and speculative analysis. Some details remain unverified. All interpretations are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only.